Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and present my screen. Oh, and before I forget, okay, on your math, I think it's number 11. It's the question where you have to like graph and then like make a triangle and write coordinates and stuff. You can skip that one. I think it's number 11. It's the one that's really complicated. So you'll see on the answer sheet, it's extra credit, okay? All right, so I'm presenting now.
What would the title be for the one that we did the other day?
Blitzkrieg.
Blitzkrieg? Okay.
Blitzkrieg. Okay, so we're going to review real quick, and then we're going to move on to where we were. So
are we going to learn about the
Battle of what?
Britain.
Yes, we are. So we talked about the war begins in September 1939 in Europe when Germany marches into Poland. We talked about before that how Germany had acquired a lot of land because they were sneaky and they would find ways with diplomacy to take land. So they took part of the Czech Republic, the Sudetenland. They took over the rest of the Czech Republic after that. They walked into Austria. So the actual war, though, when we have battles beginning, is September 1939 when the Germans invade Poland. And we talked about how Blitzkrieg is a term that was used to describe how fast the Germans could move, that it was like lightning war. And it only took 18 days to conquer Poland, which is amazing. Okay, so then Britain and France have to declare war because they promised they would defend Poland. And then nothing happens for a couple months. Germany stops attacking, and they call it the phony war because nothing happened. But then the war starts up again in April 1940, and that's where we left off. Isn't this an interesting picture with these huge tanks? Well, these are baby tanks, actually. And then they have all the Nazi flags behind them. That would have been a good propaganda picture you would hang up. Okay, so Denmark, the country of Denmark, which is just north of Germany, it is invaded April 9th. It surrenders April 9th. They don't even last one day. You don't need to write any of this down. What I want you to understand is how quickly the Germans move. So these are the, I guess these are the Germans maybe, and these are the Danes. I'm not sure. Norway is invaded April 9th, and they surrender after fighting June 9th. So they had about 2 months of fighting. So they did a pretty good job compared to everyone else. Luxembourg, 1 day, invaded May 10th, surrenders May 10th. The Netherlands, Holland, where Corrie ten Boom in the hiding place was, they're invaded May 10th. They surrendered just 4 days later on May 14th. And this is a picture of one of the Dutch towns that had been bombed. We talked about how the Germans were able to use airplanes and tanks and infantry all at the same time to do total war on a country and take over it quickly. So you can see this city, I think it's Rotterdam, has been really destroyed. This building is gone. Belgium. Remember, a lot of the First World War was fought in Belgium. It is invaded May 10th. It surrenders May 28th. So this is probably down here all of the Belgian army supplies that they were forced to give up when they surrendered to the Germans.
They did okay.
18 days. Well, it's pretty sad that your entire country can be taken over in 18 days, but it is a tiny little country, and the Germans are really powerful. France, okay, they're invaded May 10th, and they surrender June 22nd. It's only 6 weeks, guys, for Hitler to take over France. Think about how World War I happened, and France fought for 4 years to keep the Germans out of France, and they never got very far into France. Their whole country is taken over in 6 weeks. And if you look at this picture, you can go walk where this picture was taken today. It's up like on the hill overlooking the Eiffel Tower. And you can see Hitler and his generals in Paris after Paris surrendered. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, so the main thing I want you to get is the rest of it. Europe was taken over very, very quickly once Hitler starts. In April, really like starts the war back up. Everything is pretty much taken over by June 22nd. So essentially, in April, May, about 3 months, he takes over almost all of Western Europe. That's crazy.
Yep.
Okay, British Expeditionary Force. Go ahead and write this down. I'm sorry, I forgot to put this in blue. So go ahead and copy this down on your sheet.
Should we write British Expeditionary?
Yeah, so that's going to be on your left.
Okay, or not
right.
just write the full thing.
Yeah, you'll need to write the whole thing because you don't know what BEF stands for otherwise.
Okay.
So in World War I, we talked about how we had the American Expeditionary Force. And expeditionary force is when you send your troops to go fight in a different country. You're not defending your country. So the British troops went from Great Britain. They took boats and they went to go help their French buddies. Okay. So these were British soldiers fighting Nazis on the European continent. And it was the bulk of the British army, 300,000 men to fight the Germans. And they don't do too hot. They're trapped at Dunkirk, which is spelled in the French way up here, Dunkerque. And the problem is the British and the French are pushed back super duper quickly because they have no idea the Germans are coming. And they go and they're stuck in this little port town of Dunkirk right here. The entire German army is literally behind them with their tanks and their planes and their guys with big guns. And the British and the French are trapped there.
Is that what the movie like Dunkirk with Harry Styles? Is that what that's about?
It is, yes.
Are we only supposed to write the first part, like?
No, make sure you write this part too.
Oh, okay. Then I may need another minute.
That's okay. So you have to remember, guys, that when these soldiers went to war, they're thinking that this is going to be like World War I, where you're going to sit in a trench for a while. You're not going to do a lot. And instead, this is a war. World War I is all about sitting in one place and not moving very far. The lines in World War I, the soldiers didn't move very far the entire war. World War II is all about moving and momentum. And the Germans are able to go in very, very quickly and take over most of Europe. Can I switch the slide?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Cool. Okay, so usually at this time of the year, we watch Darkest Hour, but I can't show that to you because we're not at school, but it's a fantastic movie. It's all about Winston Churchill, and he has to decide at this point, should he negotiate with Hitler to save his troops that are stuck in France, or should he fight it out, or should he not surrender? So let's see, what should you write? Okay, under British Expeditionary Force, I would just write this first part where it says Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill must decide if he should surrender or continue to fight.
Wait, we write that under the BEF?
British Expeditionary Force is fine, yeah.
Miss Ballard.
Uh-huh.
How do you pronounce his last name?
Churchill?
Is it Churchill or Churchill?
Churchill.
What?
They sound the same.
Is it like, does it sound like two separate words, or is it like...
No, it's
one
like
word?
Churchill.
Oh.
You don't say Churchill, you say Churchill.
Oh, I get it now.
That's okay. So he has to decide. He has a really important decision. Like, should he try to sue for peace with Hitler? Should he surrender? Because pretty much his entire army is surrounded by the Germans, and they have Germans in front of them, and behind them is the ocean. Or should he do something else? So this is a really important moment in history, because if he surrenders, there is no British army. There is literally not a country left in Europe that has not been taken over by the Axis powers, the Nazis or the Italians. So it's a really important moment. And I would recommend, if you have time, to see if you can try to watch this movie. It's super good. Great. Did everybody write down about Winston Churchill?
No.
Okay.
Miss Ballard.
Uh-huh.
Wait,
I'm done now.
I don't know.
do
what I
we
was
just
gonna
have to write the first thing?
Yeah, just the first thing.
Okay.
Oh, Miss Ballard, what would they have done if Britain was conquered? Would all the allies just have fallen back to America?
If Britain had been conquered, so let's say that Winston Churchill surrenders here. So all of his men, his entire British army would have gone over to the Germans would have used them probably as war laborers, like building things. So essentially Britain would have been left defenseless. They would have had a navy and they would have had an air force. But if the Germans landed, if they took their boats and went to Britain, it would be really hard to fight them. Winston Churchill does a famous speech, which I usually have you guys memorize, but we're not going to have that ability this time. But he talks about how the British Empire will rescue them until America does. So like Italy, or not Italy, India, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada were all parts of the British Empire. So Churchill believed that even if his army fell, he would have the rest of the empire that would come and save him until America finally decided to help him. It would have been way, way harder to defeat Germany, though, because that was really the jumping off point to Europe. There would have been no way for our troops to get to Europe very easily otherwise. Okay, so again, this is not in blue, but I want you to write it down. Okay, Dunkirk should be on the left. And then this is on the right. Okay. Dunkirk is the town where these guys are stuck. There's 200,000 British soldiers, 100,000 French soldiers. They're stuck on the beaches. The German army is coming up the road with the big old tanks and their planes and their guys with guns. And in front of them is the ocean. And beyond the ocean, if they could get on a boat, is Great Britain. They could be rescued, hopefully.
What about the U-boats?
There were some U-boats for my friends who don't know what that is. It's like submarines. But they weren't, I don't think they were concentrated very much in that area at this point.
Okay.
So how would you rescue these soldiers that are stuck on the beaches in lines? Do you see this? They're in lines waiting to be rescued. Any ideas?
The British will come and save them?
What? Okay, we're just going to go on. So, yes, they have to come up with a daring rescue plan. And it's called Operation Dynamo, which most people refer to as Dunkirk. Okay.
Did you want us to write the how would?
No, you don't need to write that.
Okay.
So what they do is the British send every ship they have in the military or the Navy to go get the soldiers. But it's not enough ships. They need little baby ships too, because they can't get the ships close enough to the beach. So they call up, they use the radio and they ask anybody who has a boat, we don't care what kind of boat it is, if it's anything that has a motor, we want you to try and take it to France and put the soldiers on it. So they call this the fleet of the little boats. And you can see this is not a very big boat, is it? But it can hold like 10 or 20 people. Same thing here. This can hold people, and they can take those boats and it can put the people from the beach onto the big boats and take them back to Britain. And they're able to rescue all of the men because people who have boats in England, like civilian boats, they work together with the military to rescue all these guys. It's really a beautiful story.
Can you please go back one slide? Thanks.
You don't need to write this bottom part. So these guys get up and they get in these lines and they wait for the boats to come and rescue them.
Well, Miss Ballard, how many little boats were there?
That's a great question, Audrey. It was like thousands of boats.
Did the Germans try to stop the little boats?
That's an excellent question. Let me see.
Didn't they try to shoot them down with
I'm going to show you a trailer for the Dunkirk movie, and then I'll answer that question, okay?
Harry Styles.
Harry Styles.
I have no idea who that is.
Oh, gosh. I'm sorry. Hang on. Whoa, go back. Okay, so let me try this again. Sorry, my bad.
Should we watch this movie?
It's really good.
I actually have never seen it. I've heard it's really good.
Hmm.
So that's propaganda the Germans are dropping. These are the guys in line.
Tanks have stopped. Why?
Is that a dead guy?
They waste precious tanks when they can pick us off from the air like fish in a barrel. There are 400,000 men on this beach. He's coming back round. He's coming back round! Where are we going? Dunkirk. I'm not coming back.
There's no hiding from this, son. We have a job to do.
If we go there, we'll die.
How many guys
We'll see
died?
it from here. What? Home.
Okay, let me get out of this. All right, so
How many guys died?
okay, so let's go back and I'll answer that question, Audrey. So okay, this is that's the picture I have apparently. Why isn't this? Hang on, it got all whacked out.
I was gonna say, didn't the Germans just get their planes and just strafe them on the beaches?
Yes. Okay. So the guys are all stuck here in Dunkirk. There's all the British guys and some of the French guys. Okay. And what's really, really weird is that Hitler, his army could swoop in and just finish them all off with the tanks. But he issues an order that tells all of the German army to stop. So he tells every German soldier, you cannot go any further. You cannot annihilate the British and the French, even though they're like just down the road. He says you have to stop and you have to wait for, I think it's like 48 hours. And during that time, the German Air Force goes, it's like bombing and strafing, which is like shooting them with the machine guns on the planes, the guys on the beach. But most of the guys, I mean, yes, people die, but most of the guys are able to escape. On the little boats, which take them to the big boats, which take them back to England. But it's just really weird, guys. People don't know why Hitler told his army to stop. They could have killed everyone there, and they didn't because Hitler told them to stop. So no one knows why. There's several things that people have said. They say that, well, Hitler was afraid that he'd had too much good luck because he had pretty much taken over most of Europe super quickly. So he said, okay, we need to stop and regroup. The other reason is that the guy who was in charge of the Air Force, Hermann Goering, told Hitler that we can take care of this with just the planes. You don't need to send your soldiers in. So people don't know exactly what happened, but that the fact that he told his army to stop is one of the things that saved all these men.
Miss Ballard, can you tell everybody to mute themselves because it keeps going in and out and I can't hear everything that you're saying.
Okay, yes. Can everyone pause for a second and mute yourself? Okay, is that better, Annie? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. Okay, so essentially, the guys are able to escape, and Britain stands alone needs to be on your left-hand side of your paper, and this is the right. Okay, so this is Europe, a map of Europe in 1940. As we can see, Germany and Italy control almost all of Western Europe. The part that Germany controls is this kind of tan color. And then the part that's like the allies of the Germans, governments that support the Germans, are the darker brown color. So Germany controls all of this land. Vichy France is really German controlled, but it has its own government that's like a puppet government to the Germans. The Italians are buddies with the Germans. All of these countries are buddies with the Germans. And this land down here that was part of Africa, that used to be part of like the British and the French territories that they controlled as part of imperialism. So the Germans and the Italians took over this land. So now it was also in German hands. So if you look at the map, the only allied country left is Great Britain up here. And this, I think, really shows you why Britain is so important in the war. It's really the only good guy left. Spain and Portugal are neutral. Russia is neutral. They're not going to attack the Germans. Switzerland is neutral. These countries are also neutral at this point.
Should we write this?
What?
Should we write this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions on Europe at the end of 1940?
So you said like all the ones that are in white are like a neutral power? The
They're
neutral
neutral,
ones?
which means that they have an agreement with the Germans to not attack the Germans. Usually to make the Germans leave you alone, though, you had to really be helping them. So really the Spanish, they are helping the Germans. During the Spanish Civil War, the Germans came in and practiced bombing civilians in Spain. So they're buddies with Hitler.
Wait, they practiced bombing
Yeah, so they practiced bombing and killing people.
on actual people?
Yes, it's really appalling. So you can read about that. That's in your history book, but we didn't have time to go over it. Switzerland is really interesting. Switzerland has been neutral in a lot of wars in recent time. One of the things that lets them be neutral is they have a lot of money. So all those Germans who were stealing lots of money had somewhere to deposit it. So they would take it to the banks in Switzerland. You might have heard of Swiss bank accounts. So you don't have to pay taxes on it. So even though Switzerland wasn't helping the Germans with weapons, they were laundering German money. They were helping the German generals and leaders, like keeping all their money for them. So
like the only way that you could stay neutral is if you actually helped them?
yeah, if you were
So then you're technically neutral?
yeah. So pretty much all the countries that are neutral are still doing something to help the Germans or are useful to the Germans.
Okay.
So Switzerland helps with like the German bank accounts, but a lot of Jews try to escape into Switzerland because it's neutral. So the German military doesn't go in there, but the leadership is still helping the Germans to some extent.
Do they let
What
the
happens
Jewish people
to-
go in there?
Say it again, Isabel.
Do they let the Jewish come into Switzerland?
So I think it was more like if you got into Switzerland, they wouldn't kick you out. They didn't encourage you to come. I don't know. That's a good question. It wasn't like all Jews can come here, but if you got in, they didn't usually send you back.
Miss Ballard,
Okay.
what happened to Switzerland after the war?
Like were they punished?
Yeah.
I don't think so because people from all over the world send their money to Switzerland, even today. If you have a Swiss bank account, it means that you're finding a way to put the money that you earned into Switzerland so that you're not paying taxes to your government on it. So people from America do this, people from every country do this. So I think they were pretty much just left alone because at the end of the war, we had bigger fish to fry with all of the war criminals. It's a good question. Okay. On the left-hand side of your page, you're going to write Allied powers. And then write these 4 countries next to that. So there are 4 main Allied powers in the war. Great Britain and France are already fighting on behalf of the Allies. France kind of poops out really quick. But a lot of their guys are able to escape at Dunkirk to Britain, and they hang out in Britain.
Miss Ballard, are these the good guys?
These are the good guys. They hang out in Britain for a couple years until they can either go back for D-Day or they go fight with the British in Africa to get rid of the Germans. Okay, so hang on just a second, Audrey. Great Britain and France. Russia becomes an ally because the Germans, Hitler, remember, they promised to be neutral, but Hitler goes in and tries to take over Russia in 1940 or 1941. I think it's 41. And so they become an ally, even though we don't like Joseph Stalin. We don't trust him at all. They become one of the allies as well. And the United States, we're going to talk about next week, we become an ally, and a very important ally, after Pearl Harbor. We join the war. Now, questions.
Is the Union of Soviets that thing Russia?
That is Russia.
Okay.
So we talked about how Russia changed their name to the USSR. So technically, we say they're Russian, but technically, they were Soviets. They just changed the country's name.
Miss Ballard? Question. Where did the Japanese get involved?
Can I switch the slide, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then on your next slide, on the left, write Axis powers, and then write Germany, Italy, and Japan. Okay. So we talked a lot about Germany and Italy, right, Audrey?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So these guys both want to take more land in Europe and Africa. The Japanese are over in the Pacific side, and they're taking a lot of the islands. They're taking China. They're taking parts of us. They're trying to capture Northern Australia, Papua New Guinea. So the Germans and the Japanese and the Italians, they become buddies, but they don't necessarily fight next to each other. It's more like the Germans are like, hey, Italy, if you go take care of America in the Pacific, we'll take care of them in Europe, and then we'll defeat them. We'll like split their forces and defeat them.
Isn't this where like Midway comes in? Like
Yes,
America and Japan are fighting. That was a good movie.
I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, so America fighting in Japan, and that's really America's first victory. We don't actually fight in Europe. Like, we do not send American soldiers to Europe until 1944 with D-Day. Even though we perceive Hitler as a big threat, we actually don't send Americans to Europe until 1944. We send them to Africa first to defeat the Germans and Italians that have taken over Africa, as a way to like kind of figure out how to do it, because we don't know how to fight a war at this point with these new Nazi weapons, and we don't know how to fight a war where we have to land on the beaches. So it's like practice. But we start fighting Japan earlier, in like 1942 is Midway, I think. You guys are having great questions today. Anything else before I switch?
I don't think so.
Okay. So there's other countries that ally with Germany, but they're not as important. They're really just like we'd say puppet governments. Okay. So the Battle of Britain part, there aren't any actual specific notes you need to write down. What I'm going to ask, though, is that you're paying attention, because I might ask you a flip grid question about this, or a test question like, what was the Battle of Britain and why was it important? Okay, so just be thinking about that, so you could explain it. Okay, so just take notes. I would just do bullets. I'm not going to have anything you specifically need to write, but if you find something interesting, just write a bullet on it. Okay. Okay, so here's our picture, and there's this guy who is standing on top of a roof. This looks super dangerous. He has binoculars. He's wearing a tin helmet. He's got his binoculars bag. He's got his gas mask bag. And where are his binoculars looking? Into the sky. Absolutely right. He's looking into the sky. So the Battle of Britain, we talked about Britain was our last guy left, right? The Battle of Britain is going to actually take place mostly in the air. And this is a picture of London, and that's St. Paul's Cathedral, which you can go see. Okay, so France surrenders June 22nd, 1940. And where are they surrendering at? Does anyone remember why this is an important picture?
Because that's where the Germans surrendered in World War One.
Exactly. Good job, Sage. So this is the train car that the Germans signed the armistice in World War One. So
Miss
Hitler
Barr,
goes and
Miss Barr.
hang on. Hitler goes and he forces the French to sign the agreement to surrender in the same train car, and then he blows it up. So that way, in case he does lose, they can't sign anything else more in this train car. Yes, Audrey.
I was gonna say, didn't he like blow it up? That's what I was gonna
He did indeed. And here's the French guy. Doesn't he have a funny looking hat? All right.
It's a weird looking hat. It looks
I
like
know.
a birthday cake.
It's very strange. So anyway, we talked about Britain is all that's left. And Winston Churchill does his famous speech about never surrendering. Probably next week, I'll have you guys watch a clip from the Darkest Hour movie where he says the speech. It's an amazing speech. I would normally have you guys memorize it, but we're just not going to have time this year. Okay, and in this speech, he talks about how the Britain is never going to surrender. We will never stop fighting Germany. And it's really important because look how close London is to the rest of Europe. The only thing protecting them is this little body of water, the English Channel. And I think at one point, the coast of England to the coast of France is 60 miles. So during World War I, that would be enough to protect you from another army. However, during World War II, we have something called planes, which are much more modern, and they can fly over and bomb you. So it's much bigger deal how close they are, and the channel isn't going to protect you as much.
Miss Ballard.
Uh-huh.
Are Germany and Britain still enemies today?
No, they're both part of what's called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which means that we work together to and the United States is too. The United States was in charge of it, to fight people we don't like the Russians, essentially. So they're buddies with us.
We don't like Russia?
We do not.
Why don't we like the Russians?
Because of the Cold War.
Yeah, because of the Cold War, we wanted to nuke us.
No.
That's another story for another day. Okay, so anyway, this is a fancy picture just showing all of the places that the Nazis could put their air forces in France, and they could fly over and bomb England. So there's lots of places that they could fly their planes over and drop bombs on England. Okay, so this is a picture of Nazi planes. You can see the little cross on them, like the Iron Cross, over Britain. They're going over to bomb these big, wide planes. However, Britain had a secret weapon, which was radar. So the idea of radar is you have two things, and you send a signal, and it bounces back, right? Well, if for some reason your signal can't bounce back, if something goes where the signal would be, it's going to bounce off that new thing, like a plane. And that's how they know that the Germans are coming. So it's sending radio signals through the air, and that's how they know the German bombers are coming. But they don't want the Germans to know. So they start telling all these they start telling all this fake news about radar. And they say, you know, the British pilots, they are able to shoot down so many German planes because they can see better. They eat lots of carrots. Their eyes are so much better. Everyone should eat carrots. So they try to keep radar a secret for as long as possible during the war. And carrots, yeah, that's not true. Like carrots keep your eyes strong, but they don't improve your vision.
So, for the radar thing,
Uh-huh.
Is it like they are the only ones who have it, or does Germany have it and they just didn't?
The Germans were working on something with radar, but they didn't have it as well developed as the British. The British were the first to really get it.
Okay.
Didn't the Americans have it? Because it says
we
it
had it
shows that
written.
in Tora.
Yes, we have it. But I think the British were the ones who were the first to develop it. Okay.
Everybody, can
So
you
this is hang on.
This
This is a video showing a reenactment of the Battle of Britain. So we're just going to watch a couple minutes of this. And it's showing you the German planes are going to come and try to bomb South England, and the British fighters' job is to shoot them down.
Rapid squadron. Tally ho, red section. We'll take the rear starboard. Yellow. You
So these are
take
the British
forward.
fighter pilots.
Yellow one will go. Tally ho, yellow. Where are you? Keep your eyes open for the rest, more.
Okay, so the main idea with that is, hang on. Oh, why does it always do that? So you had all these British fighter pilots who had to try to shoot down all these German bombers. The idea is Hitler wanted his bombers to bomb London, bomb all these British cities so that the British would have to surrender because all their guys were dying. But Britain did not want to surrender. So if you were a civilian, though, you didn't really have a lot of choices in what would happen. And you had a lot of air raids that you had to live through. So this is the sound you would hear. It's really eerie when the radar picked up the Germans, so you knew they were coming. And your job was to try to go into a shelter of some kind to protect yourself and your family. Oh, go back. Hang on. Oh, no! Okay, well, it's another job for another day then. Have you guys seen the beginning of the Chronicles of Narnia?
Mm-hmm.
So at the beginning of the Chronicles of Narnia, the family's trying to go to the air raid shelter. So some people would build them like these sheds in their backyard. Some people would go into actual like shelters that were community shelters, and some people would go into the underground or subway stations. So this is a picture of some of the destruction in England, in London. You can see this building is all completely destroyed. And these are the poor firefighters trying to put out the fires from the bombs. This is one of the most famous pictures of the war because both the British and the Germans used it as propaganda. So the British said, look, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, it's still standing amidst all this devastation and all the bombing. It's still here. It's good to go. The Germans took the same picture and said, look, St. Paul's Cathedral is on fire. We're winning the war. Interesting how propaganda works. These are people sleeping in the subway or underground stations. They would stop the trains from running and people would just sleep on the platform. If you've ever been on a subway platform, you know it's really, really dirty, but people would spend their whole nights down here and trying to sleep during the air raids.
Were they allowed to like sleep inside of the subway?
Sometime. That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure, but the trains weren't always in the station. So it looks like there's a guy in there, but there wasn't always a train at each station. And sometimes the underground stations did get direct hits, and they weren't super duper strong. So entire stations would be ruined with all the people sleeping in them. So this is a picture of one of the underground trains that got destroyed.
Would the people die with like whenever that
Yeah.
happened?
So sometimes, if it was a direct hit, there wasn't a lot that was going to protect you. Yes, question?
Okay. Yeah. What did the Germans even care that they were bombing like civilians?
That's a great question. So originally they started by bombing the where like the British Air
illegal?
Force, like where they kept their planes. But Hitler said it wasn't working fast enough. So yes, you should bomb the civilians. So it's terrible. And you see, it's like a different kind of war than World War One. Okay, so
Isn't that illegal?
what?
Isn't it illegal to bomb civilians?
Yes, it's not cool. And I mean, these are innocent people who are not fighting, but Hitler said, you know, the only way I'm going to finally get rid of these British people and to get them to surrender is if I attack their families, if I attack their towns. He was a very evil man. Conversely, though, you could say that later on in the war, when the British had the upper hand and the Americans, we went through and we bombed all of their towns and we killed lots and lots of people. And we would drop fire bombs so that fire bombs would like light the town on fire so more people would die. So we did this as well. It's really, really bad.
People can be horrible.
They can, and World War II shows that. And it's also horrible that YouTube has taken all my videos off. Frustrating. Okay, so this is another image of a night after the day after a night of bombing.
Miss Ballard, isn't that book that we read last year in Mr. Murphy about the Battle of Britain and how she had to leave the town and stuff with the horses?
Which book did you read?
Wasn't it her legs? Like she had like paralyzed legs or something?
Didn't she have like a
I think it
club
was.
foot or
the
whatever?
one,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
one
she had,
that's
like,
like
club
the
foot.
something that saved my life or whatever.
Yeah,
The
it's
War
like,
That Saved
like
My
the
Life.
war that saved my life.
Oh, I have not read that. I'll have to ask Mr. Murphy.
It's like
So you can see that London is pretty leveled after this. And then this is the last thing I think we're talking about today. Yep. Okay. So Hitler realizes that the British are pretty good at shooting down his planes. So he eventually gives up. But his whole plan was to destroy Britain by bombing the cities. And then he was going to send in his troops, send them over the English Channel in boats and to attack and like storm up the British Isles by walking and like with the tanks and stuff. But that never happens. He never actually invades because the British are able to hold off the bombers. Later in the war, though, you have Nazi scientists who develop some of the weapons we use today, which are it's essentially drone technology. It was the first time it was used. So this would have been later in the war, and they have two kinds of, we could say, drones that they send. The first is called the V1. It looks like this. It's essentially like an airplane, and it would be on this, it looks kind of like a roller coaster track, and they would start it off, and it would go down the track and pick up speed, and it would glide up over the track. It would glide over the English Channel, and then it had a motor, but the motor would stop, and then it would go straight down, and the bomb would explode.
that is a waste of plane.
What?
That's a waste of plane.
Well, you didn't have a pilot or anything in it.
Yeah, I know, but like
It'd be just like it's a waste of people. Like we're wasting people.
Well, yes, but it's like think of like a drone. But they didn't have a way to fly it back, Audrey. It just pretty much had a motor, and whichever way the motor sent it is where it went. They couldn't really control, like, except for like the way that the like roller coaster thing would shoot it off. They couldn't really control them very well. They called them doodle bugs.
That is interesting.
Because you would hear the motor going, and all of a sudden the motor would cut out, and that means that it's no longer flying and it's going to go straight down. So you knew as long as you could hear it that you were okay. So hopefully this works. Oh yeah. So this is the actual sound. Okay, so then the sound cuts out, and that's how you know that the V1 is going to go straight down to the earth, and that's when you're in trouble.
What was that like marching noise?
The marching noise?
Yeah, it was like a marching thing.
Oh, well, you should have just heard the engine. So that was the engine of the plane. So that was really like the first drone. The Germans realized these are really easy to shoot down, though, because they go in a straight line and they don't evade fire. So it's very easy for the guys in the anti-aircraft guns on the ground to shoot them down, or the fighter pilots. So they have to be a little bit more clever, and they come up with rockets. So the Germans, the Nazis, are really the first people to develop rockets under a guy named Werner von Braun. And they have these rockets, and they call them V2s, and they shoot up into the little bit over the stratosphere, which is where the weather is, and they come back down, and they have a gyroscope to guide them where they land. So these are much easier to decide where it's going to hit. And these are very effective, and they kill, I think it's like several thousand people with these. They're very scary because they come out of nowhere. So that was really like, when we think of like rockets or ballistic missiles that people use today, the Germans are the ones who invented them. Last thing I'm going to say real quick before we go is Werner von Braun, the guy who invented these, he became the head of the US's NASA program. He was the guy who developed all of our rockets that sent the guys to the moon. So after the war, we went and we captured Werner von Braun, and we said, you can work for us, or you can go work for the Russians. But either way, you're going to work for somebody. So he says, cool, I'm so excited to be an American. And he becomes the father of our NASA program, really.
Miss Bauer,
Okay.
do we have to write like a paragraph thing?
Hang on, I'm going to turn the recorder off.